Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Pooja Waliaman from SGI Samalkha. Today we are going to talk on the module Service Supply Constraints and Demand Patterns from the paper Service Marketing. So students, let us see what we are going to learn in this module. In this module, you will learn meaning of service supply, meaning of service supply constraints, meaning of service demand, then meaning of service demand patterns, aligning demand and supply. Now, let us assume that you are a manager in a tourism organization which deals with offering holiday packages to the premium end consumers. The company owns, let's say, more than 300 properties across the country and about 50 locations and sites around the world. Over the period of 1 year, as a regional sales manager, posted in North India, you have observed that there are a few locations which are often the most demanded ones based on seasons and school vacations. And similarly, there are some locations which are not much in demand except for any business purposes. So accordingly, you proposed to the top management to price these destinations differently based on the demand patterns. In this case, your advice is based on demand patterns of the tourist destinations. Services, being perishable in nature, cannot be stored. This is what results in the problem of managing the supply of services during the periods of fluctuations. The business environment is dynamic, and so are the demand situations of the consumers. Sometimes the demand of certain services is very high, that there may be waiting lines for the delivery of these services. And on the other hand, there may be idle capacity for service production not being consumed. A service manager needs to balance the supply of services so as to meet the demand of the same in not less or not more than what is required in the target market. If any organization is unable to manage the service inventory, there may be 4 different possibilities of service production situations. The first is excess service demand. This is a situation in which the demand for a service is more than the supply capacity. The second is demand exceeds the optimum capacity. In this situation, the demand for a service is more than what can be offered in a smooth manner to the potential consumers. No one is refused a service, but there may be mismanagement or chaos due to heavy rush. Demand and supply may be balanced as a third possibility. In this situation, the demand is balanced with the supply to the most ideal level. And the last possibility is the excess service capacity. Here, the service capacity is more than the demand for the service. So here, let's talk about the production possibility set or frontier. Collection of all possible combinations of the goods and services that can be produced from a given amount of resources and a given stock of technological knowledge is called the production possibility set or frontier of the economy. These combinations can be graphically put in the form of a curve, and therefore it's known as production possibility curve or PPC. Let us now look at some problems in service supply. Supply of services is a more complicated and uncertain process than supply of manufactured physical goods. Due to the experiential nature of services as being intangible and perishable, it is hard to assess the capacity of delivery of the service to the consumers. Secondly, due to the lack of objective ownership of services, justifying the capacity of services becomes complex. Supply is one of the most important elements of production and marketing of services. Though study of demand and supply may not receive its due attention in service firms, yet it is a critical factor to determine the success and otherwise of a firm. Capacity planning for services is a very complex task, and there are several hurdles in determining one best level which a service firm will decide upon. Often, a trade-off between the demand and supply may be noticeable in service marketing. This may happen when, due to dynamic market situations, the service manager constantly has to plan the supply level. There are several factors affecting the firm's decision to fix a capacity level of services. That is, customers' expectations, competitive pricing, legal framework governing marketing of services, social environment, and the technological environment affecting the marketing and consumption of services. Let us discuss some of the constraints faced by the service marketers to finalize the supply capacity of the services. The first is no standard input cost. While the product manufacturing may have standard input cost and a uniform level of finished goods quality, the services may be diverse in its own character as well as in its features than others. This diversity makes a standard supply of services difficult. For example, for various services, a hotel manager may be incurring different costs. The demand for different services would be different depending upon the demand from different segments of consumers based on income. Hence, the service manager may have a tough time in deciding how much arrangement for various services needs to be made. The second refers to services being perishable, cannot be stored to cater to demand fluctuations. Now, one of the most important factors affecting the pricing of services is the perishable nature of services. Since the demand fluctuations of services cannot be met by creating services inventory, it is very difficult for the marketer to fix a price to meet different demand levels. One might have come across low rate of the movie tickets during odd hours, like for early morning shows or during weekdays when less audience is expected. This may also be observed when various airlines charge a lower airfare during off-seasons. This is the strategy made use of by the service providers to offset the perishable nature of the services. The third constraint could be that services being intangible makes cost calculation difficult. Now, this is another dimension that can complicate the demand pattern, and that is the high intangibility of the services. Since the component of intangibility is very high for services, it becomes difficult to calculate the cost of various activities or processes. For intangible yet homogeneous services like dry cleaning, it is easier to calculate the cost per unit and thus have an expected demand pattern flowing for various items. However, in case of non-uniform services like health practitioners, nutritionists, image consultants, lawyers, etc., there is no standard service being provided to the buyer, no uniform cost structure per unit, and hence the calculation of actual demand may be difficult. It may be said that more customized service being offered to the customer, greater flexibility there can be in demand estimation of the service. In such cases, the demand may be arrived at by estimating the paying capacity of the target customers. Now, students, we come to the last constraint, the government regulations. For some services, the supply may be fixed by the government or other regulatory agencies of the government. Some of the examples of services in which the supply may be subject to governmental regulations could be the capacity of railways, toll taxes, electricity supply, or water supply. In some services, the trade associations may also play a direct or an indirect role in supply fixation. For some international services like waterways, airways, etc., the supply of services may be affected by international agreements or understanding. Despite the various problems involved in the process of estimating the supply level for a service, it remains the most significant activity of service marketing, as it is the timely availability of the required service in required quantity which directly contributes in the sales profit and growth of a firm. Demand. Demand refers to the quantity required by a consumer of any commodity for which he is willing to buy and has an ability to buy. We can discuss the functions of demand in two parts. The individual demand function, which is the function of price of commodity X, PR, that is the price of related commodity. The related commodity could be substitute goods, where price increase of one increase the demand for another service, or it could be complementary goods, where price increase of one may decrease the demand for another service. The third is the income of consumers, denoted by Y, wherein for normal goods, when the income increases, it leads to increase in demand. Whereas for inferior goods, increase in income leads to decrease in demand. Then, taste and preferences of consumers, denoted by T, which may change due to climate, fashion, or time. And the last is expectations of the consumers, denoted by a capital E. The second demand function is known as the market demand function, dx, which is a function of price of commodity X, denoted by Px, Pr, which is the price of related commodity for both substitute goods and complementary goods, Y as the income of consumers, having different effects for normal goods and inferior goods, taste and preferences of the consumers, denoted by T, expectations of the consumers, denoted by capital E, then size of population or the target consumers, denoted by a capital N, and finally the distribution of income, denoted by YD. The graphical representation of this demand function is known as a demand curve. Here, the independent variables is shown on the vertical axis like price variable, and the dependent variables are shown on the horizontal axis like the quantity demanded, aggregate of all consumers' demands, etc. Such functions, if shown in the form of a tabular, refers to a demand schedule. Therefore, we can have two demand schedules. Individual demand schedule, which is demand of a commodity of an individual consumer at different prices, and a market demand schedule, which is the demand of a commodity of all consumers at different prices. Let us now come to yet another important topic, demand forecasting. Demand forecasting is a systematic process of identifying the demand for a given service at a given point of time for a given marketplace. There may be various tools and techniques used by the service manager to evaluate the demand of a particular service. Such tools can range from a jurist or an expert's opinion to a statistical trend analysis for understanding the demand pattern. Now here we come to another important variable is called as demand pattern. The service output in various organizations can be worked out on the basis of demand curves, which may be charted out for a given period of time through statistical analysis. There are several demand curves which may be used to predict the demand for various services. There are a number of demand curves like stable and constant demand, stable and cyclic demand, linear and accelerating demand, linear and diminishing demand, life cycle demand, etc. A service organization can make use of a number of techniques to understand the demand patterns. Some of these patterns are, firstly, charting demand pattern. This refers to a systematic process of understanding the demand of a service being witnessed over a period of time and then making a judgment about the future demand. For this evaluation of demand, often the organization making use of MIS are more accurately able to chart the demand pattern. The second pattern could be the predictable cycles. Often, the factors that affect demand can be categorized as predictable and unpredictable. The predictable factors can facilitate in charting a demand pattern for a service. Then comes the random demand fluctuations. In general, the demand patterns do not follow a very predictable pattern for services. There may be random fluctuations of demand which may not be easily identifiable. Then comes the market segments and demand patterns. One of the most simplified methods of charting out a demand pattern is the division of market into homogeneous market segments and the development of their segregated demands. This facilitates in accurately identifying demand patterns across the various segments. Can there be a matching done between demand and supply? A service organization needs to have a clear understanding of the supply constraints and the demand patterns to be able to match demand and supply for the service at a given period of time. There are two approaches to manage the balance between the demand and supply. The first is to smooth the demand fluctuations and accomplish a match between the demand and supply. The second is the ability of the service organization to adjust the service production to match the demand and fluctuations of demand of the market. For managing to strike a balance between the demand and supply, the service firm can attempt to keep the consumers away during the duration when the demand is more than supply. There are various methods for doing that. We shall discuss it one by one. The first such strategy is known as differential pricing. Differential pricing of services during peak time and during lean time. Differential pricing is also known as flexible pricing. In this tactic, the service seller may charge a different price to overcome the perishability characteristic of the services and manage the demand fluctuations of the market. This tactic means charging a different price for the service. The differences may be based on, firstly, customers' ability to pay. That means the service marketer may charge a different price for different set of customers for almost the same level of service. For example, electricity board may charge a different price for supply of electricity to domestic and commercial consumers. Secondly, there could be time differentials. Here, different prices may be charged for almost the same service on a different time of purchase. A restaurant may give some discount on its regular dishes on the off-peak hours. Similarly, airlines may offer lower prices during off-season to the customers. And thirdly, place differentials, in which A service may be charged differently depending on the place of its delivery or consumption. Like rent of a room or a building may be charged differently on the basis of its location. Further, cinema hall tickets may be priced differently for a same movie depending upon the row of seat in the hall. Let's go ahead. The second tactic could be the discount pricing. Such a practice means to offer a discount to an intermediary for rendering a service. This tactic is often used to generate demand during off-seasons. For example, a DJ player may charge a lesser price for playing in a marriage if contacted via a banquet hall owner, or an advertisement may be charged less if booked through an advertising agency. The third strategy could be varied service offering. Services being intangible, there is a lot of variation in the input and output, as also in the demands and expectations of the customers. Thus, there are several service support activities offered to the customer of a similar service. The cost of each of these activities may be added up to arrive at a final price of the service being offered. For instance, a DTH operator may charge a differential pricing from a subscriber buying a different set of satellite channels. The pricing of the DTH subscription depends upon the subscriber's choice of channels he wants to watch. Thus, the DTH operator charges different price for different channel combinations. Another approach for shifting demand and capacity is to communicate with the customers. It helps them know the times of peak demand so that they can choose to use the service at alternative times and avoid crowdings or delays. For example, sign-in banks and post offices let the customers know their busiest hours and the busiest days of the week, and it can serve as a warning. This allows the customers to shift their demand to another time if it is possible for them. Forewarning the customers about busy times and the possible waits can have added benefits. Many customer service phone lines provide a similar warning by informing the waiting customers of approximately how long it will be until they are served. Those who don't want to wait may choose to call back later when the lines are less busy. Research in a bank context found that customers who were forewarned about the bank's busiest hours were most satisfied, even when they had to wait, than were the customers who were not forewarned. In addition to signage communicating the peak demand times to the customers, advertising and other forms of promotion can emphasize different service benefits during peak and slow periods. Advertising and sales messages can also remind customers about peak demand times. Demand refers to the quantity being needed, backed with the ability and willingness to purchase by the potential customer for a given commodity at a given price at a given time. Supply is the capacity of the service marketer to make a service available to the service consumer at a given quantity, at a given price, and at a given rate. Services, due to its essential nature of perishability and intangibility, cannot be manufactured and stored. It is produced and consumed at the same time. This results in supply constraints at a number of times when the demand may exceed the supply or the supply may exceed the demand. So students, let us now summarize what we learned in this module. A service manager not only has to understand the demand patterns to assure of a smooth supply, but may also be required to make a few strategies to spread the demand during peak season and get more demand during the off seasons. One of the means available to a service manager is to adjust the supply capacity of the service organization to match with the demand. The purpose is to adjust, stretch, or align the production capacity of the service organization to be able to match the demand for that service during any given period of time. For the purpose of stretching the supply, the organization pools into all its available resources like personnel, equipment, infrastructure, etc. to bring out a higher productivity within the available support system. The resources may be put to use for longer hours or made to work hard to cater to the increased demand. The other means of aligning supply and demand is to adjust supply resources creatively or to add on some resources from outside the organization for temporary periods. This may include hiring some part-time or temporary staff or to outsource some process of the service to make its existing service personnel concentrate in delivering the core service by satisfying the needs and wants of the customers effectively. Thank you.